i.e. the right to vote. The civil rights movement grew in strength in the 1950s and then inspired a broad radicalization in the 1960s. So it's not really coincidental that the 40s and 50s was a time of turbulence. Women in and around the communist and the Trotskyist movements at that time, in the 40s, began to re-examine theories of women's oppression, with some of them incorporating the effects not only of class inequality to women's oppression, but also racism. In so doing, they began to develop a political groundwork that helped to pave the way for the future fight for women's liberation. I'm going to describe that so you can kind of see it for yourself. And it is worth noting that in spite of the Communist Party's Stalinist policies, its members within the party, its rank and file members, began to passionately discuss the problems of male chauvinism inside the party and in the world at large. A lot of this discussion appeared in the letters pages of the party's newspapers, with readers and writers pressuring the party leadership to do something to explicitly combat women's oppression in practice. And these letter writers had a lot to complain about, let me tell you, because the party's newspapers still at that time routinely had photos of scantily clad women for no other reason than just for the heck of it, including what were then known as quote-unquote cheesecake photos of quote-unquote bathing beauties, with captions like this: "The most beautiful legs in the world." Yes, they did. And saying of one beauty contest winner, I swear, "Mrs. New York, and she can cook too." The women's page of the party's newspaper was called, it featured basically a cartoon of a white woman dressed in high heels happily dusting her furniture, and with a banner headline that read, "It's on the house," that offered a variety of household hints and dress patterns for communist women to read. So angry letter writers in 1949, they were complaining extremely loudly by that point, and frequently they were saying, "You've got to get rid of these sexist images." Here's a couple of the comments. "We feel it is very important for the Daily to eliminate the cheesecake pictures. These pictures have no liberating effect for women in the working class, but on the contrary are used to perpetuate male supremacy through the idea that sex is women's only attribute." Pretty good. Another letter said, "Cheesecake is a slap in the face. I have seen many requests for articles and items on the role of women in this social struggle. Surely you cannot continue to prevent artistic views of the female body as an answer to this demand," end quote. Within a matter of months, in 1949, the cheesecake photos disappeared from the party's publications. And by a year later, 1950, the women's page the old women's page was replaced by a Women Today page with an image of two smiling women, one black, one white, which featured articles on women's role in social and class movements. In response, letter writers urged them to do more. They wanted more of this kind of coverage. One writer argued, quote, "Tear into the male supremacy that is holding back the movement almost as much as white supremacy," end quote. So you can see, so they did respond. The Communist Party did respond to all this pressure, and they began to really expand their attention to women's oppression, organizing classes throughout the organization for members on topics such as, quote, "male supremacy and the family," end quote, which was aimed at male members as well as women members. They said men had to go to these classes. During this time, Black Communist Party leader Claudia Jones, who unfortunately has almost no name recognition, and yet she is a pioneer in the theoretical exposition of the interlocking oppressions suffered by Black women. She wrote an article in 1949 called An End to the Neglect of the Problems of the Negro Woman, exclamation point. And first she says, quote, Negro women as workers, as Negroes, and as women are the most oppressed strata of the whole population, end quote. No one had ever kind of put those things into words before. Jones continued, it is incumbent on progressive unionists to realize that in the fight for equal rights for Negro workers, it is necessary to have a special approach to Negro women workers, who far out of proportion to other women workers are the main breadwinners in their families. She goes on and explicitly challenges what she called progressive white women to recognize that this fight for equality of Negro women is in their own self-interest, inasmuch as the super-exploitation and oppression of Negro women tends to depress the standards of all women. Persistent challenge to every chauvinist remark as concerns the Negro woman is vitally necessary if we are to break down the understandable distrust on the part of Negro women who are repelled by the white chauvinism they often find expressed in progressive circles. Couldn't have said it better. In the same essay, Jones says that emphasizes that black women's sexual assault is one of the, what she called, key issues facing Negro women. But none so dramatizes the oppressed status of Negro womanhood as does the case of Rosa Lee Ingram, widowed mother of 14 children, 2 of them dead, who faced life imprisonment in a Georgia jail for the crime of defending herself from the indecent advances of a white supremacist. It exposes the hypocritical alibi of the lynchers of Negro manhood who have historically hidden behind the skirts of white women when they try to cover up their foul crimes with the chivalry of protecting white womanhood. Jones concluded, and I'm reading this because I think it's so important, what path she laid out that got picked up in the 60s. She concluded that proper attention to the plight of black women will allow, in her words, their active participation in fulfilling the historic mission of the entire American working class, the achievement of a socialist America, the final and full guarantee of women's emancipation. I think that that is just so profound, and everybody knows who Betty Friedan is, but nobody knows who Claudia Jones is. She was unable to continue her work in the Communist Party basically just because of the persecution of socialists and communists that was going on at that time. She ended up in jail, in prison, numerous times, alongside people like Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, figures in the communist and socialist movements. So she served a number of prison terms, if you will, and that severely damaged her health. Like, she was in very ill health. She finally got deported in 1955 by the U.S. government because under the, the Alien Act, the Un-American Activities Act, Internal Security Act, which banned, quote unquote, aliens from participating in the Communist Party. She then ends up in Britain, which is the only place that would take her, and she died of a massive heart attack by the age of 49. So she was never able to continue building on this path-breaking contribution. What did happen, though, is that the work she'd begun in the Communist Party, she and other women, was taken up by other women in and around the Communist Party, and a significant number of men also embraced this work. And this is kind of a interesting kind of piece of information, is that in the 1950s, the Communist Party began organizing local women's commissions to help encourage women's active participation in the party. They had education classes just for women to help them get more confident to take on leadership positions. These classes, and this has been a part of the socialist tradition ever since, they provided free childcare and transportation for these women to make it easier for working class women to attend. And that is a practice still practiced by us in the ISO today. In January 1947, I want to give you one example of what this looked like. The Bronzeville Communist Party held a special women's dinner meeting at which the women attendees enjoyed a lecture on the role of women today and discussed the problems they faced while the men cooked, this is a quote, cooked and served the food, minded children, and washed dishes. During the post-war period, Trotskyist women were also engaged. They were much smaller and much more marginalized than the Communist Party, just so you know. They were also engaged in revisiting women's oppression. In 1952, then Trotskyist Selma James co-authored a pamphlet called A Woman's Place, which was, which addresses the weight of the family responsibilities and so forth, kind of like the feminine mystique, except with a working class woman and not a middle class woman in mind. She wrote, even though a woman works, it is assumed from the very beginning that the main responsibility of the house is the woman's and the main job of support is the man's. The husband is to go out and support you and the children. You are to make sure that the house is clean, the children are cared for, meals are cooked, laundry is done, etc. This seems a fair way of doing things, but soon you find that housework is a never-ending job that is monotonous and repetitious. And after a while, doing these things in the house, such as ironing or getting up early to make lunches or breakfast, is not something that you want to do, it's something that you have to do, end quote.